Our freedom, our personhood is at stake right now, and I don't know that people have quite grasped that reality.
Are we ready for the next civil rights movement? And what could it look like? I mean, we're talking about a rollback on things like DEI and what some people would consider an attack on people's actual identity and existence. This is something you have studied in and out.
I'm only ever interested in the context of liberation and how we can make sure that we're thinking about people not just in economics, but people in their humanity, and how we can create space for everyone to live in their fullness. And I think we absolutely are, in a very real way, where we were then. Like in 2020, we were grappling with this idea of a reckoning. Oh, this is like Reconstruction. It was never Reconstruction. This is the new Jim Crow, extended, extended, extended. And we have to be willing to be bound to one another for the sake of humanity and freedom. And that is what is at stake. Our freedom, our personhood is at stake right now. And I don't know that people have quite grasped that reality because Americans are so comfortable at even whatever class you're in, when you look to other countries that are doing worse than us, we have a level of privilege that no one else has that almost allows us to have this very acutely American way of we don't recognize tyranny until it's directly on top of our shoulders. We have to feel the pain ourselves before we're willing to fight. And I don't know what the flashpoint is going to be for us to actually rally together and really fight.
Well, it's interesting because the April 5th hands-off protest just happened, right? And we saw these large numbers of people hitting the streets, but we also saw a lot of people, mainly Black people, who are like, I'm staying my butt at home because I've been in the streets in 2020, right? And this is what you talked about with start launching a beautiful resistance and how we're always having to fight, but people are wanting to reclaim their time and their rest. Clyve, do you think that we have really reached that watershed moment where we're all having to find something to rally around together? And are we meeting in that moment?
I think that every time that there is a crisis in American politics, it is another opportunity for people to really rise up and build the coalitions necessary to push back and support broader change. I think that Trump's election last year was a watershed moment, waking up in a way to see not just how far right the Republican Party has moved over the last few years and how we're seeing those attacks on civil rights and immigration, but also in many ways how the Democratic Party failed in its mission to provide real working class change, and combining some of the movement building that we've seen through the George Floyd reckoning with that call. And I'm thinking about it from a student perspective, how student organizers at my campus and elsewhere throughout the country have been invoking 1968 and the general student movement against Vietnam, later against South African apartheid, to say that we need to push back against those attacks that we're seeing from the federal government at the moment. So
do you think it is time for us to see a civil rights movement, even if it doesn't look exactly the same as 1968, but something similar? Yeah, I think it has to be something similar. I think, for one, we know that there are these long-lasting legacies of Jim Crow that are still existing today, where, for example, American cities are more segregated now than they were 30 years ago. And so it just shows the importance of having a real multiracial coalition that is sustaining and is more than just a reckoning or moment, kind of like what we saw in 2020 as one of the flaws, was that that movement, while really huge and had tens of millions of people showing out, was very temporary and eventually led to very little political change.
I think we need to be careful because if we look back just a few years ago in 2020, there was, you mentioned George Floyd. I have specific opinions about that, but what I saw a lot of—
Oh, wait, what are those opinions? Go ahead, Bruce.
I don't believe George Floyd was a hero. I don't believe that it was necessary to destroy large American cities. Do I think that people should have been held accountable? Absolutely. Should George Floyd have died when we don't know, because there is still a lot of debate about how he actually died. Do I believe in police brutality?
Well, there was video showing that the police officer, Derek Chauvin, was kneeling on his neck.
Without a question, and he should be punished. Don't misunderstand me. But the thing is that they also did an autopsy and found out that he was in the process of dying anyway. Should he have even touched that guy? on your best day. But we've got to be careful, because what I find, and I'm a black conservative, which is weird in Massachusetts, but what I've discovered is that a lot of people are taking a very small piece of a story and they are making major decisions on it. And I've been seeing this happen for a very long time. So I'm not saying there's not a civil rights thing. But I'm not saying that the federal government is wrong in everything they do right now. I think a lot of it, when you look at getting back or dealing with government waste, that's an important thing. And that directly affects the black community, because you've got people out there that need help. Heck, I've been in a position where I've needed help, but a poor person can't help another poor person. If we're wasting government resources on things like that, the first people that get affected typically are the black community. So we need to, I'm not saying you got to agree with everything. As a matter of fact, you shouldn't agree with everything the federal government does. That's my opinion. But what's important is that you stop for a minute, keep that nonviolent, Dr. King's nonviolent attitude in the back of your brain, because in Portland, and I'm probably going to offend a lot of people right now, but Black Lives Matter failed. They failed. Why? Because black businesses suffered.
But maybe it's not Black Lives Matter that is sort of the beacon, so to speak, that we look to for leading this movement.
I agree with that.
Can we put a flag on the play? Because I think there's a moment of clarity that we need to have here in this discussion, because there's two things that are happening here. There's civil rights and there's human rights, right? So your civil rights are your relationship to the law. Your human rights are what you're entitled to as a human being. 1948, post-World War II, UN comes together and puts together a Declaration of Human Rights. Now, granted, women are not exactly in the way that they should be fully included, but there are some fundamentals about human rights. And so when we talk about this moment of rights and movement in the rest of the world, most people are talking about human rights. They're not talking about civil rights. And so I think that we need a moment of clarity to talk about this, because there's some things that fundamentally, as a human being, you're entitled to.
Absolutely.
You're entitled to education. You're entitled to clean water, safe housing. If the country you're living in is unsafe, you have the right to move to somewhere else to be safe for your family. Women and children have the right for protection. There are certain things that are guaranteed. And so when we talk about this larger thing of the federal government and what's happening here and what's happening there, fundamentally, we have lost sight that one of the basic things we as the black community are talking about is not civil rights. It's not my relationship to the law. It is my right as a human being. And that has been part of the issues that we've been fundamentally denied, is those things that I should just have access to. A kid should be able to live in a house and not have lead poisoning. They should have access to clean water. How long has Flint been going on? So I hear what you're saying, but I also feel like we have to clarify that what's at stake here is not necessarily civil rights. It is 110% humanity.
So, Jenee, listening to what Noelle is saying, how can that be channeled into a modern-day civil rights movement?
I mean, Noelle's spot on in everything she's saying. It's kind of what I was trying to say earlier about personhood and humanity being at stake, and that's what we need to recognize. And I'm sorry, but to your point about BLM, that's also taking a small aspect of some truths and just sort of generalizing, because that group, one, everything should not be under the gaze of BLM, but just to clarify, it's a lot of people were hired to infiltrate and do things to make things happen in those cities. I was in Minneapolis. I was there at George Floyd's funeral. So it's just to brush over these things and make it seem like everyone's just in the streets being violent is just untrue. And this, make sure you're in the MLK nonviolent gaze. MLK was very righteous and filled with righteous rage. And he was this, every time people try to focus on the nonviolent thing, I feel like they do it in a way that sort of whitewashes what a radical he was, and the fact that eventually him and Malcolm X came together and really did believe in the same things.
And we also have to note that even in his nonviolence, he was still assassinated.
Yes, he was still
considered
assassinated.
an enemy of the state.
Peace won't get you free. And something else I'm gonna come back to Noelle, but I also just have to address, poor people absolutely can help poor people, and poor black people have always helped poor black people and immigrant people and other folks. We are often the ones helping ourselves. Rent parties, financially, we have always been helping each other. So that idea is just also inherently untrue about our community. We have always been building each other, splitting the bread in half, doing everything we can to make the money multiply, to make the humanity multiply, to keep on having grit and grace in the fire. in order for us, to Noelle's point, to answer your point, just about like, I understand the idea of being careful, but I guess I would choose the word intention. I would want to, like, I get what you're saying about being careful. We just have to be intentional and I totally agree encompassing and inclusive of people. Right now, I'm most worried about trans folks, immigrant folks, and our students. Like, I'm worried, are you even safe to protest on your campus?
Are you, Clyve? Do you feel that you are?
I don't feel safe protesting on campus. I do it anyway because I think we need moral courage, and I know that other students are with me on that, but I don't think at this moment that it is necessarily safe for students. I think Trump is very explicitly targeting universities, students, both undergrad and grad. Actually, just yesterday, Harvard just announced that they revoked 5 student visas. We don't know who they are, but we know that in other campuses that they have been because of pro-Palestinian speech. And so I think that is a very dangerous moment. And I wanted to say something about that combination between civil rights and human rights. I think that you're right that, like, you know, it's a basic question of human rights, clean air, clean water, access to education. And civil rights, I'm sure you know, are like, obviously the way to accomplish that. And I think, like, one thing that I think is missing from the discussion in general is that we need that political movement building, that social movement building to achieve the human rights. If we aren't guaranteeing the civil rights, not just of voting, but of protest, of speech, of resistance and pushing back, then we definitely will not be able to achieve the human rights.
Bruce, thank you, Clyve. Bruce, I want to ask, because so much of what is being undone right now was laid out in Project 2025. This was something that President Trump distanced himself from, but it seems like he's continuing to follow that playbook. So how are Black conservatives responding? What exactly is their plan?
Black conservatives are looking at things for what they are, not necessarily what we want them to be. And that's been a huge problem. I've run for office multiple times, and I continually run into this, where people say, well, it should be that way. Well, that's great. It's not that way. And you have to make friends with that. As far as Black conservatives are concerned, we're frustrated because nobody's listening to us. Not only is nobody listening to us, they are there is a purposeful methodology to make Black conservatives seem like that they're this weird conglomeration of, well, you're not Black enough, or, well, you're not necessarily, for the Black community.
I'm going to jump in just because I want to get to one last question with all of you before we wrap here. But how do you think we can all get on the same page? If there's a faction of Black people that are feeling alienated, what collectively do you think we should all be doing?
Well, first stop listening to the news media. That's the first step.
Oh, no, but you're here.
No, but you're letting us talk. That's different. Okay, unless you're editing me every other word, that's a different thing. No, I'm just kidding. But it's true. I long before I was even in politics, I was sitting in Iraq as a United States Army officer. And I heard CNN say that the Japanese are absolutely not sending troops to Iraq. They're not doing it. 2 days later, I watched 2 Japanese troops eat in my dining facility and walk out and go back to their unit. So that's either bad journalism or it's intentionally misleading, and I'm not sure which one's worse. And it's 10 times worse now. What I'm saying is this, and I say this to my Republican conservative friends, do not take what you hear as the gospel truth.
And I think that having discussions like this here on GBH News Rooted, also what Jenee is doing with A Beautiful Resistance, Black journalists showing up and telling stories for us and by us is exactly, and we're doing so in good faith and trying to reshape those narratives. So before I let all of you go, given that the name of this show is GBH News Rooted, what is keeping you rooted right now?
You know what's keeping me rooted is the history of my community. It has been a very difficult weeks for Black museums. We work hard to preserve the history and tell the story of the multiplicity of Black experiences. And to feel like you're being erased, that your work is being undone is difficult. And so I draw strength from the past and the ancestors to know that they went through even more difficult circumstances, and I could do the same thing.
Jenee, what about you?
What's keeping me rooted is our responsibility to one another, and not just as a journalist or as a witness, but just as a human. Like, we have lost sight of that purpose in such a terrible way due to our obsession with greed and just measuring people in dollars instead of in their spirit and who they are as a person. And it's just being responsible for one another, because this administration is working hard with the arts, with education, in every facet of our society to stifle and scare the people so they will be too afraid to have a movement. And we're gonna have to do it scared, but do it prepared. And that's what keeps me rooted, because resilience and resistance and being rooted in one another is what is vital to us right now to make it day by day.
Bruce, what's keeping you rooted?
My faith. Because no matter what happens out there, I mean, I've seen the worst of humanity. I've seen poverty that doesn't exist in the United States at all. I don't care what, you can go the deepest, darkest places in this country, and there isn't poverty that exists that I've seen in the Middle East. So it's my faith, knowing that no matter what, that faith is solid and rooted in something that's real. I also am deeply rooted with family and with connections, in that I can connect with people who may not necessarily agree with me, but know that I have their best, no matter what, I have their best interests at heart.
And Clyve, lastly?
I think what's keeping me rooted is community, is family, friendship, people who I've been able to learn from and grow with. And I think there is a growing awareness in terms of the need for collective action. And so I feel like people are willing to and will continue to show up in spaces where they need to.
Well, Clyve, Jenee, Bruce, and Noelle, thank you for ushering it, christening the Rooted table here. You're part of the family, yes, and I hope to have you back again soon.